The winter wind howled through the narrow alleyways of Elderma City, carrying with it the bitter promise of a harsh night ahead. Finch pulled his worn coat tighter around his shoulders as he made his way through the dimly lit streets, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. He had spent another fruitless day searching for work, and now all he wanted was to return to the abandoned warehouse he called home. As he turned the corner near the old marketplace, something caught his attention, a faint whimpering sound, almost like the mewling of kittens, but stranger somehow. Finch paused, tilting his head to listen more carefully. The sound came again, weaker this time, from beneath a stack of discarded crates. Curiosity overcoming his exhaustion, Finch approached the pile cautiously. As he drew closer, he noticed a peculiar shimmer in the shadows, like moonlight dancing on scales. His heart quickened. Living on the streets had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared him for what he found. Nestled between two broken crates were two tiny creatures, no larger than newborn puppies. But these were no ordinary animals. Even in the darkness, Finch could make out their delicate wings, translucent and membrane-thin, their small serpentine bodies covered in iridescent scales that shifted between silver and pale blue. Dragon hatchlings, creatures that existed only in the old stories his grandmother used to tell. The tiny dragons were shivering violently, their eyes barely open, making those pitiful sounds that had drawn him here. They looked abandoned, helpless, and desperately cold. Finch knew that feeling all too well. Without thinking twice, he opened his coat and carefully scooped up the trembling creatures. They were surprisingly light, their scales cool to the touch. As soon as they felt his warmth, they instinctively burrowed deeper into his coat, pressing against his chest, seeking the heat of his body. Their tiny claws, sharp but not yet strong enough to pierce fabric, clung to his shirt. "It's all right, little ones," Finch whispered, buttoning his coat carefully to create a warm cocoon around them. "I've got you now." The walk back to his warehouse seemed longer than usual, with Finch moving carefully to avoid jostling his unexpected companions. He could feel their small hearts beating rapidly against his chest, their breathing gradually steadying as they absorbed his warmth. By the time he reached his makeshift shelter, they had fallen into what seemed like a peaceful sleep. Inside the warehouse, Finch had created a modest living space. In one corner, a pile of salvaged blankets, a few books he'd rescued from a dumpster, and a small camping stove he used for cooking. It wasn't much, but it was his. Tonight, it would have to serve 2 more souls. He sat down carefully on his blanket pile and slowly opened his coat to check on his new friends. 2 pairs of crystalline eyes blinked up at him. One dragon's eyes were the color of morning frost, the others like polished sapphires. They made small chirping sounds, their fear seemingly replaced by trust. "Well, aren't you two something special?" Finch said softly, running a gentle finger along one dragon's spine. The creature arched into his touch, its tiny wings fluttering with pleasure. Over the next hour, Finch did his best to make them comfortable. He heated some water on his stove and offered it to them in a shallow tin can lid. They lapped at it eagerly, their forked tongues flicking in and out. When they seemed hungry, he tore up small pieces of the dried meat he'd been saving for himself. The dragons devoured it, their enthusiasm bringing the first smile to Finch's face in days. As the night deepened and the temperature continued to drop, Finch wrapped himself in his blankets with the 2 dragons nestled in his lap. They had stopped shivering now, their scales warming and beginning to glow faintly with an inner light. One curled up on his left thigh, the other on his right, both purring and sound like tiny bells ringing. "I should give you names," Finch mused aloud, studying them in the dim light of his single candle. The one with frost-colored eyes seemed calm and contemplative, while the sapphire-eyed one was more alert and curious. "How about Frozen for you?" he said, touching the serene one gently. "And you can be—" "Wait, that won't work. Can't call you both Finch." He chuckled at his own confusion, then reconsidered. "Frozen and Glimmer. No, that's not quite right either." The sapphire dragon chirped and climbed up his chest, pressing its small snout against his chin affectionately. Finch's heart melted. In that moment, he understood something profound. These creatures had chosen to trust him completely. Despite being so vulnerable, they had nothing to offer him except their faith that he would protect them. Gently, Finch picked up both dragons, one in each hand, and held them close to his face. They nuzzled against his cheeks, their scales surprisingly soft now that they were warm. He brought them together against his chest in a tender embrace, feeling their tiny bodies relaxing completely in his hold. "I don't know how you ended up alone out there," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "or why someone would abandon such magical creatures. But I promise you this, as long as I'm breathing, you'll never be cold or hungry or afraid again. We homeless souls have to stick together." The dragons responded by wrapping their tails around his wrists, as if sealing a pact. Their gentle purring resumed, and soon their eyes began to droop with sleep. As Finch settled down for the night, the two dragons tucked securely between his chest and his coat. He felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He had someone depending on him, someone to protect, to care for, to love. Outside, the wind continued its lonely howl. But inside the warehouse, 3 orphaned souls had found warmth together, and in the darkness, the dragon's scales glowed just a little brighter, as if responding to the warmth of a heart that had chosen kindness over indifference. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, Finch held something precious in his arms, and that was enough.